What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you the initial details of 1666 Amsterdam, an upcoming title centered around pretty much what the title would tell you, Amsterdam in 1666, but specifically witchcraft and some eerie goings-on that we'll have to get to the bottom of. And we actually learned about this game very recently at the Summer Games Fest, where it was finally revealed, and honestly, just on vibes alone, I was curious to take a look at it. However, there's a lot of information to go over here, plus we got a prologue demo that was dropped alongside the announcement. But even that demo, I think, bears a little, I would say, context to make it make a little more sense for you. And so I figured, having had to look all this up for myself, I may as well share it with other people, and hopefully they'll get some use out of it. So let's start from the beginning. 1666 Amsterdam was recently announced. However, it's been in development in various forms for a very long time, like all the way back in 2012, apparently, and has been championed a great deal by one of the people behind the original Assassin's Creed and kind of getting that franchise rolling. Through the usual variety of corporate nonsense, this game got started and then was effectively canceled, and then the rights for it went back and forth, and so long story short, it's been a long time coming for this game to be announced, and I would say the fact that we're hearing about it at all seems to come down to largely that one developer, after eventually acquiring the rights to the project and then spinning up their own studio to make it happen, and finally here we are. And that actually is a little more telling than you might initially think, because what this game's ultimate form will wind up being is probably something akin, at least, to Assassin's Creed in terms of basic gameplay elements. However, that is not what the prologue demo is. It's important to understand that the prologue demo is in fact just the prologue that is basically 30 minutes of narrative setting up everything that you will experience in the game when it is launching into early access later this year. With that in mind, if you play the prologue hoping to get a sense of how the game plays and what the gameplay is going to be like, it is not good for that. That's not the point of it at all. And before we talk about it, I'll just start with the key issues I had playing through it for myself, which is the source of all the footage you are seeing. And that is primarily that the voice acting, as well as the way a lot of it is written, is a little off. For starters, there's part of it where you are effectively playing through a letter that is being narrated by one of the characters Presented's father. And it's being presented as that letter, as I mentioned, but then the way it is being told is nobody talks or even writes like that. It's a very odd juxtaposition, especially given who the letter is supposed to be addressed to. And on top of that, the voice acting is not great, honestly. That kind of thing usually doesn't bother me, but here it is egregiously not good. And I sincerely hope that that is placeholder. Now, the core ideas that it is trying to get across are fine. However, again, some of the execution there, which will hopefully, just over the course of the early access at the very least, be refined and addressed. Otherwise, though, what is the prologue demo all about? Well, it basically kind of gives you the narrative setup, as I mentioned, which is spanning a couple of different time periods. The game is primarily taking place in 1666 Amsterdam, yes. However, that's not the only time period we see. We see a little bit in the modern day, as well as a little bit in 1999. However, starting from the beginning, we are primarily going to be playing as a young witch known as Noah, the Collector. Now, this woman was raised by a tribe known as the Zainderies, who have raised her with the express intention of becoming the Collector, basically someone who collects power that was given to people known as the Originals. And that's going to be the primary bit of gameplay, us tracking these people down and using all of the methods available to us to take that power back. It's mentioned that you'll be able to take down these targets in multiple different ways over on the game's Steam page, but that's not something we see in the demo, and we only see a little bit of combat and the like, and a little sizzle reel at the end of the demo if you finish it. Now, it looks like Noah is our primarily witchcraft type player. She'll be able to absorb energy from the dead and then use that energy to power various spells. In that little sizzle reel I mentioned, we see her performing some combat things, leaping from rooftops, the typical kind of Assassin's Creed stuff in many ways. And we see a couple of just examples, of course, of how you're going to be using that magic. And then towards the end of her section, you also have to pick a cat. Now, these cats have different names and are effectively going to act as your familiar, but they also presumably have some sort of gameplay effect. However, However, we again don't see that in the demo. So all of these cats are mentioned to have like certain traits and personalities, and so I don't think it would be crazy to assume that they would maybe have like different specialties or provide different effects or something. I would hope that that doesn't wind up being purely flavor text. However, who the cat is actually somebody from 1999, but to explain that you have to jump to modern day, which the game does. So from this we jump cut to a woman known as Cleo talking to an old acquaintance of her father, trying to decipher a strange letter written in the Zandaris script, which protects it from being read, and you just do like a little investigation piece in order to read that letter, which then jumps to 1999 to explain the situation. Basically, the woman Cleo, her father seems to have died or disappeared at the very least, and is explaining who this young woman's mother is, who apparently she didn't know, by explaining that back in 1999 he had a very odd amorous encounter with presumably this young woman's mother, which gets into witchcraft pretty fast and just so happens to send Aaron, the guy we're talking about here, back to the past to be Noah from earlier's familiar. So the cat that you're going to be accompanied by is played by this Aaron guy, who's apparently actually from 1999. Now, the Steam page also mentions switching back and forth between those two characters primarily, so there will be sections where you are playing as Aaron via his cat form here, and presumably doing like surveillance and investigations, that kind of thing. If anything, I think this might be where the choice of the cat specialty may or may not come into play. And so, at the very least, there's a playable cat. Now, these two are teaming up to take on a relatively specific mission, and that is, as I mentioned, tracking down these entities known as the Originals, who are basically hiding in plain sight in 1666 Amsterdam, and our job is to track them down and reclaim their power, which they apparently no longer have a right to. Now, I'm not exactly sure of the specifics, but the Steam page mentions that they have lived for centuries and been granted that expanded life, as well as just general power, by utilizing power that is not actually theirs, but presumably belongs to this tribe you are ultimately working for. And so we're going to use our witchcraft and presumably some form of the cat's usefulness to, of course, bring these things to heal. Now, the Steam page also specifically mentions doing this at an SBAT, which, if you don't know, is like an occult gathering, if you will, and so presumably that's some sort of narrative context in which you actually take the power from these people, and all of that being presented alongside, again, just the sort of narrative context of it being all these different moving pieces across different times is interesting enough. I'd be curious to see if they can pull it off. Gameplay-wise, we have yet to actually experience that for ourselves, but I don't think necessarily, like, again, just Assassin's Creed-esque approach to something like this would be terrible by any means, especially if the city itself is going to be fun to explore. They mention exploring it during the daytime, and then that at nighttime there will be certain other elements, though they are very vague about what that actually entails, but we do know there's some element of, like, day-night cycle here as we seek to actually uncover what is going on. But I do think that about wraps up currently what we know about 1666 Amsterdam, which, again, has just simply caught my interest. I'll definitely be covering this whenever it actually hits early access, and then I'll almost certainly wind up reviewing it when it releases, but who knows how long that will actually wind up being until then. But it looks like we will be talking about this at least one more time later this year, but for today, I do think that is pretty much going to do it. Certainly hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.